Thank you very much, Celine, for inviting me to do this. Non sum dignus. I'm also very happy to see my successor at the Benedict XVI Institute here this evening. Good to have you here. Welcome. One of the young lads that I was talking to beforehand said, I looked at the title of this talk and I couldn't make head nor tail of what it meant. And I said, well, that's great preparation because that's the way you will be at the end of the talk as well. Stuttering Siren and Penitent Pope, a drama of the ugly. Evagrius of Pontus, whom I like with his Antireticos, his book on lipping off the demons that assault the monk or the Christian with the words of God, Evagrius of Pontus describes the theologian in this way. Another name for theologian is man at prayer. Well, I like that. Mutatis mutandis, so the person at prayer. Now that's a necessary but not sufficient condition that is often lost. There are lots of theologians who don't pray and lots of prayers who aren't theologians. But what I offer tonight is something that flows from the great joy I have of finding myself savoring priesthood in a way I've never done in the whole of my many years as a priest, because I'm ordained for the Diocese of Saskatoon to be a parish priest. And now that reality is mine. And I'm not just a papa. I discovered this year when I was preparing a couple for marriage, and I looked at their name and I said, I went to school with your dad. And he looked at me and he said, no, you went to school with my grandpa. And I went, aha, you see, because I've been living and working with younger people so much that I have this illusion that I'm young. And I'm not. Mi venne in sogno una femmina balba, negli occhi guerce sovri più distorta con le man mocche di colore schialba. That's from the Purgatorio that we're going to look at. But we are going to have a chiasm, a beginning and an end that's the same, and it comes from St. Augustine. In order to maintain your faith, Augustine writes, Christ deformed himself while he remained eternally beautiful. Christ's deformity renders you shapely. If in fact he had not wished to be deformed, you would never have reacquired the divine form that you had lost. Therefore, he was deformed when he hung on the cross. But his deformity constitutes our beauty. One of the instructions that I drilled into generations of students who passed under my tutelage was that their first port of call in preparation for research or reflection was the Oxford English Dictionary. Words are the treasury of experience and wisdom of the human family. The etymology of each is a compendium of history that, if explored, provides the sure map for the voyage ahead. This came to me when I was listening to a maven of all things indigenous marvel at the multiple words there are in Inuit for snow. Hold on, I thought. We have many words for snow as well. Ice, sleet, slush, flakes, blizzard, drift, pack, hail, glacier. And if you dig into each of these snow words, who do you meet? You find hardy Vikings complaining about the weather to misplaced Germans amidst the Roman ruins of England. I digress, and not for the first time, or the last time. Before we go further then, we should look at what the wisdom, the story of the word ugly affords us. Hardly a surprise, given its sound, ugly finds its word in the Scandinavian word ugr, which means apprehension, fear, dread. Simply think ogre. Interestingly, the word conveys a rather subjective sense to the meaning of ugly. It points to the experience of the one who encounters something, fear, dread. Another English word of Germanic origin, loathe, springing from the Proto-Indo-European word light, which means to detest, also points to the subjective pole of the encounter, since it means to hate or to be sorrowful about something. Importantly, especially when you do any studies of French literature and art, this origin of the French word le lait, which will shape that culture's engagement of the concept, comes from this word, light, to loathe. This word, ugly, stands apart from other Indo-European languages and their words for this concept because theirs arise from compounds meaning, there we go, ill-shaped or ill-shaped. This is a very, I'm a tall guy. This was made for shrimpy people. Could someone run upstairs and get there's a stand, if you will, up in the sacristy. That's a little bit more. Oh, the one in front of, yeah, in the sacristy. That's the best one because this is too low for me. Off we go. The other Indo-European words come from words that mean ill-shaped. For example, desedes in Greek, or deformis in Latin, or kurupa in Sanskrit. Those are all Indo-European languages. The clear sense in these words is the objective quality of something encountered as, to use the English words, deformed or corrupt. The whole of my ensuing discussion, and dare I say of the discussion of the ugly, period, finds its shape in the story of this word. Approaching the reality of the ugly is complicated, thank you very much, is complicated by subjective and objective senses of the words that we are to employ. There we go. That means when we talk about the experience of the ugly, we're pointing at two things. The one who experiences it, the subjective, that brings fear, that's where the word ugger comes from, and that which causes the subject, the objective thing, which is deformed or ill-formed or corrupt. However, they do set the parameters for the exploration. The ugly is a deformed or corrupted object that produces apprehension, fear, dread, detestation, hatred, or sorrow. Now, this does make sense when we look at the Greek word for beauty, kalos, there it is. Kaleo, it comes from. The word to call. That's what beauty does. It calls, right? The ugly, like the Greek word for evil, kakos, from which we get the word kaka, because it means poo-poo, means that which is feces, excrement, that which repels. Charming post-dinner conversation. Perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. This colloquium is about Catholic realism. Perhaps I'm begging the question, is the ugly something that is real? Of course, you might say. When I look at examples of brutalist architecture, such as the Murray Library on campus, I might want to say, that is really ugly. But when I'm saying that, am I just saying, ick? I really feel awful when I encounter that building. Or am I saying, I really think that building is ill-formed? In other words, am I saying something about what I feel, or what I think? Clearly, there are some folks who, in the presence of this building, might respond, I disagree. That is a really beautiful building. And then they hired him to build the Cathedral of the Holy Family. That line was in there to be left out, and I have to go to confession. Now, we've grown justly tired of the obstinate laziness of the refrains of our times. Well, this is my truth. Yet it does seem reasonable that in this case, there might be some leeway to acknowledge possible relativism in the statement, that is really ugly. Why? Because this is an aesthetic judgment. That is a judgment of taste, or a judgment of feelings, about feelings. About taste, there's the oft-repeated Roman saying, de gustibus non disputandum est. Don't argue about things of taste. Although, between that and that, I don't think there's much of an argument. Anyone know what that is? Oh, it is. Yeah, that's the place I long to go. Sagrada Familia, made by a man whose cause for canonization is on its way through. Along with Beato Angelico, Gaudi will be a saint of the church. Pray God. How beautiful that is. It's just magnificent. See, brutalism, which is so communist, the place that you find it in is in Yugoslavia, was a great rebuilder. Tito loved building whole towns in brutalist fashion. And brutalism does what it says. It brutalizes people, right? And yes, actually, the interior of the Cathedral of the Holy Family has brutalist structures. Anybody that went to Holy Cross and sat in their theater, that's a brutalist theater. That's all grotesque architecture. That's all concrete, and the interjection of human mind. It's Saruman. And this is the elves. Nature, having a conversation, and beauty ensuing. Anyway, that wasn't in here. There's an aside. Now, when a philosopher hears the word, don't argue about matters of taste, a rabbit hole opens up, which has produced a mountain of books. Take it from me. Because whenever a philosopher is told, do not argue, you can be certain they'll write a book. Let me simply say that we might have found a place to locate the reality of the ugly, namely that it is a real feeling or a real thought. But that does not seem satisfactory at all to the Catholic view. That is a view of kata holon, according to the whole, a holistic view, a view that is never, ever satisfied with the merely subjective. Surely there's something about an object, a building, a piece of music, a play or a film or an idea that makes it ugly. Let's try a different way. Perhaps we can figure out what an ugly thing is by identifying what it is not. An ugly thing is not a beautiful thing. What is a beautiful thing? What is it about something that makes it beautiful? Since we're eventually going to end up discussing Dante's Purgatorio tonight, it makes sense to turn to the philosopher whose genius shaped Dante's thought, Thomas Aquinas. In fact, you cannot understand the Purgatorio if you don't know Thomas. It's complete. He breaks off into amazing poetic. I remember the last encounter I had of a philosopher who wrote poetry philosophy was the Cambridge Platonist Henry Moore. I did a paper on him. Boy, that's several years out of purgatory because his poetry was horrible, but not Dante. Though we cannot, it would be very worthwhile to spend the rest of the talk engaging Thomas's nuanced and balanced treatment of beauty as formally identical with, but logically different from the good. For Thomas, a good thing is a beautiful thing. Yet Thomas points out that while goodness concerns the way that an appetite meets something, goodness is what all things desire, beauty That means it's appetitive, right? Goodness. You want something because it looks good and you desire it. Beauty concerns the way a good thing meets the cognitive faculty. Beauty are those things that please us by being seen. Id quod visum placet. The goodness of a thing is what we desire, and the beauty of a thing is what when perceived by us, by being seen, and by implication by being heard, smelled, touched, tasted, pleases us. Simply, when we meet something and we desire it, it is because it is encountered as good. And we are pleased by it because it is encountered as beautiful. And the same thing, and the same dimension of the thing is both good and beautiful. Permit me to have an aside. Thomas is indebted here to both Plato and Aristotle for his definition, id quod visum placet. But his treatment of beauty unfolds throughout his work with his typical brilliant nuance. He neither allows Plato's subjectivism, if one can call it that, at least idealism, to dominate, nor does Thomas remain locked into a simple objective formalism by employing the mechanics of Aristotle's psychology and metaphysics. Rather, in a way that anticipates Kant's wrestling with the category, he maintains that beauty is both objective and subjective. And he does this with his typical introduction of a third mediating element of the encounter that produces an aesthetic experience of beauty. First of all, there's the object itself, whose features are beautiful. This then is the second dimension that is critical. There's the perception that is required for the aesthetic experience. And finally, there is a pleasure that comes with the aesthetic experience. Object, id, perception, quod visum, that it has to be seen, right? And the subject, placet, is pleased. No more need to be said here, save to note that when we consider the aesthetic category of the ugly, it can find its ground in each of these three dimensions. Let's consider, first of all, the thing in itself. Oh, I've got to go back here for a moment here. I'm a little bit out of order. What is it about a good, beautiful thing? And that is what Aristotle's term, a kalokagathon. How many of you have heard that before? Hands? Okay, good, yeah, great. The kalokagathon, actually kalokagathos in Greek means excellent or noble, right? But it's a compound of two words. Kalos, the beautiful, kai, which means and, the agathos, the good, right? Agathos, good. So Aristotle already says that beauty and good are part of the same thing. That's what excellence means. He's got the good, beautiful. Thomas, keep this always in mind, Thomas appeals then to these Aristotelian categories when he writes in the Summa, species or beauty has a likeness to the property of the sun. We're going to come back to that, but make very certain that you read that. Beauty includes three conditions: integrity or perfection. Since these are things which impaired are by the very fact ugly. He uses the Latin word turpia, which means that which repels. Okay, you draw back. So there's perfection, due proportion or harmony. And lastly, brightness or clarity. This is Aristotle. Whence things are called beautiful, which have a bright color. That's why I like wearing red. Maybe it's too much beauty though for most people. What is it about a beautiful thing that pleases by seeing? Integrity, integritas, sive perfectio, or perfection. Proportion, or consonancia, harmony. And brightness, claritas, clarity. This description of the constituents of beauty is what most persons exploring aesthetics, that's the study of art and the study of all things sensual in that sense, would see. That's what they would say. Oh, Thomas, yes, he brought the classical objective foundations for the reality of beauty. That's a structure. Does something have perfection, harmony, and clarity? Therefore, it's beautiful. And here is, as well, the criteria for understanding the objective foundation of the reality of ugly things. They are those, quae enim diminuta sunt, hoc ipso turpia sunt, things that are impaired in integrity, proportion, or clarity, are foul and ugly. That's what turpia means. What exactly this impairment to perfection, harmony, and clarity is not specified here. Let me just put forward my sense that Mark Cousins' hypotheses that an ugly object is an object which is experienced both as being there and is something that should not be there. That is, the ugly object is an object which is in the wrong place. This is a very interesting idea. Impairment happens because there's something that's there that shouldn't be there. Do you remember Pan's Labyrinth by the great, what's his name? Spanish director, not Almodovar. Thank you, Guillermo del Toro. And at a certain point, there's that creature that has eyeballs in its hands, right? That's how it sees, because it's got no eyes. That's ugly, because something that should be there ain't, and something that shouldn't be is. Okay? I actually think that's not a bad kind of definition, but that would take me down another huge rabbit hole. But just think about that. That is, this is an interesting approach, okay. Yet to reduce Thomas's understanding of beauty or ugliness to the merely psychological or philosophical engagement of aesthetics, it seems to me, to mistake its ultimate ground in Thomas's concern for ultimate reality. And that is a theological concern. The problem arises because many commentators are not even small c Catholic. They don't look at the whole of the text. That's one of the things that Yale gave me. Study the text. Explore the text. Dig into the text. And we have to know that because you see this all the time. It's a real challenge for Protestant proof texters and for Catholic proof texters and for Catholic preachers. We're going to be reading next year the Gospel of St. Luke. You cannot understand any of the Gospel of Luke by pulling out a part of it. Luke is telling a marvelous, marvelous history, and he orders it correctly. He says, I'm providing for you, Theophilus, a very correct order. That means you have to know where in the order the story happens or you don't understand it. This is also a challenge for people of your young generation who sift through years of social media posts to find one comment upon which a whole life's work can founder. Aha! We found the one time you said something wrong. Thank goodness none of my imbecility in high school exists, except, sadly, in the memory of God. We have to look, therefore, at Thomas's definition within the wider context of this text as a dimension of beauty. When he talks about beauty, that is species or beauty, he begins with a line that's too often skipped over. Species or beauty has a likeness to the property of the sun, not the celestial sun, but the Son of God. Thomas is not treating of beauty as an abstract, aesthetic, philosophical category. Rather, he's exploring whether the doctors of the church are correct in appropriating beauty as a property of God the Son. Aquinas will indeed expand upon these three dimensions of the beautiful thing, as each expressing a likeness to the property of God the Son. Considering God the Son in his being, he has the beauty of perfect nature of himself. Considering God the Son as the image of the Father, he has the beauty of proportion and harmony, the perfect image of God. And considering God the Son as the Word, he has the beauty of brightness and clarity. It's important when we look at this to see that all of this is anchored in Thomas's great theological foundation. That is, in the writings of Augustine. Now, Augustine, so all of this is, when we talk about beauty for Aquinas, we're looking at Christ. That's what we have to think of. We don't start thinking about beautiful objects out there. He introduces it to say, think upon Christ. Now, for Augustine, the basic understanding of the divine economy is that it is, that way that God orders the world, is that it is an exodus. Oops, what is this? We're jumping ahead. It's an exitus, that means it goes forth into the world, and it's a raditus, that the whole of creation is God shining and drawing all back. Okay? What does this mean? It means that for Thomas, the understanding of beauty and of ugliness always takes place against the reality of the outflowing creation of God, which has at its aim the fruitful return of creation to God. Beauty functions as Eros does in Diotima's speech in the Symposium. That's why you should all study Plato in school. In Plato, Eros, desire, leads to the good. So in Thomas's thought, the experience of beauty leads to God. Not, however, in an abstract way of moving away from reality, the physicality of the world, but as a journey into the reality of Christ, who is the beauty ever ancient, ever new. Beauty, in all of its different dimensions, finds its meaning, its reality in Christ. For as an expression of, or participation in Christ's beauty, it leads to the true good beauty, God, the Holy Trinity. Let's go back. In simple terms, you know you're in trouble when a lecture says in simple terms, then puts a Greek word up. In simple terms, beauty for Aquinas is not simply a transcendental of being, along with the good and the true. And here I would argue, it is the particular Christ dimension of being. The kalokagathon, the beauty good, becomes the Christokagathon, the Christ good. Now that's an argument, and I'm just going to posit it. The reality of beauty is the reality of Christ, who is the Word, the clarity of God, who allows us to perceive the harmony of God, who fills us with the very being of God. What of the ugly? It is what does not express the reality of Christ. That which does not engender an experience that leads us in Christ to God. Now I have a footnote for this last comment. I was at dinner with Dr. Kent Donlevy, you know very well. trying to articulate. Oh, is he there? Oh, Kent, hello. There's one of my heroes. So I'm footnoting this properly here. He's a lawyer, and if I don't do this, he'll sue me. I was at dinner with Dr. Ken Donlevy trying to articulate in a short way what you are now saying, oh my gosh, where is he going? And he cut right to the chase. That's what he said. So, what is not of Christ is what is ugly. An educator and a lawyer's laconic summary. Happily, I am a theologian and a pastor, or else I would stop right there. When I sit in the confessional, the most common penance that I assign is Psalm 139. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. Unfortunately, that's the New Revised Standard Version, which stinks. Let's try the Douay-Rheims. Thy knowledge has become wonderful to me. It is high, and I cannot reach it. Whither shall I go from thy spirit? Or whither shall I flee from thy face? If I ascend into heaven, thou art there. If I descend into hell, thou art present. There is a not so secret knowledge in Christ that makes all of our experience wonderful. The Spirit and the face of Christ are before me everywhere, in heaven and in hell. So the question, is it possible for anywhere to be truly ugly if the face of Christ is there? Don't rush past this question.